Back in June 8, 2004, Pier Solar started as a small project by community members of the website Eidolon's Inn, which is an online community dedicated to the creation of homebrew games on Sega platforms. The original Pier Solar was intended to be a simple RPG based on the members of Eidolon's Inn, target platform being the Sega CD. At this point in development, Pier Solar was simply called Tavern RPG, which was a reference to the website's message boards. As development progressed, the original idea was scrapped in favor of creating a fully fledged RPG of a much greater scale. By 2006, many of the Eidolon's Inn members were no longer directly involved in the project, with others coming in to form the core team of 8 people, with some additional outside help, and eventually became Watermelon, the developers and producers of this game, not the fruit. Pier Solar was originally intended to release in 2008, with development switching to the Sega Genesis on a 64MB cartridge, making Pier Solar the biggest game to ever release on the Genesis. Although Watermelon still wished to take advantage of the superior sound of the Sega CD by releasing the game's sound on a separate CD which could be used in tandem with the cartridge. However, Pier Solar was delayed due to a key member leaving the development team, and they didn't want their art assets used in the final game. The game released 2 years later on, December 2010, with 3 different prints of the Genesis version, 2 of which have already sold out and the third is still awaiting a ship date. Then on November 5th, 2012, Watermelon announced a Kickstarter for Pier Solar HD for the intended platforms of the Xbox 360, PC, Mac, Linux, Sega Dreamcast, as well as the Wii U and current Sony platforms. So that brings us to the September 30th release of the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 and Steam versions of Pier Solar HD and The Great Architects. As of this recording, the other versions are still awaiting a release date. This review is based off the PC version of the game, so with all that info out of the way, let's formally begin. Pier Solar is the story of 3 friends, Hudson, Alina, and Edisot. The game begins with our 3 heroes trying to find a rare magic herb to cure Hudson's bedridden father. From there, they discover the ruins of an ancient civilization, and strange phenomena begin occurring around the world, and our group of heroes decide to explore this world in order to solve the mysteries of the past. Now, this shouldn't come as much of a surprise, but Pier Solar's story is pretty standard fare, and anyone with any experience in the RPG genre should be more than familiar with this kind of story. Although the narrative is filled with all sorts of 90s JRPG cliches, that's kind of the point. But thanks to some great character interactions and dialogue, I didn't mind it in the least. If anything, the focus of the game's plot is on developing its characters and their relationships with one another, which was very evocative of the Sega CD's Lunar games, which is something I'd imagine was intentional, and the game's story is all the better for it. Speaking of the game's characters, our heroes all fill a certain JRPG party niche. Hudson is our naive small-town hero, Alina the relatable and likable big sister member of the group, and Edisot is the youngest party member who happens to be a mechanical genius. Now, this may all sound very generic, but thankfully each of the characters are very likable and incredibly well written, making it enjoyable to watch them on their predictable journey. Pier Solar is a traditional RPG through and through. You'll explore various towns and dungeons as you would very well expect. There is no overworld as you simply select your destination on a world map. As such, exploration is restricted to the game's various locales. The lack of an overworld would normally bother me, but fortunately each area is filled with enough secrets and treasure, rewarding exploration and encouraging you to take your time in all the towns and dungeons, and I really did enjoy exploring each dungeon and talking with everyone in town. Especially since many towns contain some pretty zany NPCs, many of which can task you with various side quests that are often very well rewarded, with each having some of the most hilarious dialogue the game has to offer. Inventory and character progression is very limited and rather simplistic, which is standard of the titles Pier Solar pays homage to, although I found the game's limited inventory space incredibly annoying as I was constantly forced to drop items and weapons in order to make room for all the loot I'd find in each new dungeon and area. For the most part, the core gameplay of Pier Solar is incredibly evocative of games like Lunar and the original Genesis Phantasy Star games, but again, that's the point. As such, battles are random, but thankfully the encounter rate isn't very high, and unsurprisingly, the battle system is turn-based. Pier Solar's battle system is very similar to the ones of the older RPGs I just mentioned, with each character attacking one at a time in a specified order. None of these fights are overly easy, but never too difficult. Enemies deal a lot of damage, and since certain attacks only work against certain enemy types, you'll need to actually think about and consider each move. Each character can attack, defend, use magic, and items, and well, anything else you could expect in an RPG, but something that's somewhat unique to Pier Solar is its charge system. Charging is a command that costs a turn, but for the remainder of the battle, the charge character will receive a damage increase for all of their attacks, and they can stack up to 5 charges per encounter. Some spells and special attacks require a certain amount of charge as well, making this system an addition that adds further strategy. The overall battle system is a little generic, but thanks to a fairly well balanced difficulty, remained consistently enjoyable and strategic throughout the game's duration. If you couldn't tell by looking, Pier Solar looks like a 16-bit RPG with some unique and nicely detailed character sprites, animations, and some truly mesmerizing sprite art for some of the backgrounds. The HD version allows you to freely switch between the original game's visuals and the new HD ones. The major difference between the two is the newly drawn backgrounds, as well as the HD version has new menus and character portraits. Admittedly, while I like how the game looks, I was a little disappointed that the character sprites weren't redone or changed in any way to match the new backgrounds, as I prefer the original game's visual style and stuck with that, but it's nice to have the option between both. The visuals weren't the only thing changed for this HD release, as the music was remastered as well, and all of it sounds wonderful. I found most of the music to be very high quality, with each track being enjoyable to listen to, with various boss themes standing out in particular. The soundtrack was easily one of my favorite parts of the game's overall presentation, and even if you plan skipping out on Pier Solar, its music is still worth a listen regardless. So, the bottom line for Pier Solar is pretty clear. Do you like old school RPGs evocative of the various games of the 90s? If so, I have no doubt you will absolutely love what Pier Solar has to offer, but those of you looking for innovation or something entirely unique might want to wait for a sale. Pier Solar will take around 20 to 30 hours to complete, and a little more if you plan going for the 100% completion. For the price tag of $14.99, that's some great value, with good looking sprite work, a beautiful soundtrack, and some fun but familiar gameplay, more than makes it worth picking up for RPG fans. That's all for now. If you're interested in seeing more reviews, playthroughs, and other RPG related videos, be sure to subscribe by clicking the button below. Thanks for watching.